national report that was put together by scientists at the National Wildlife Federation. As you may know, Virginia Conservation Network is the Virginia affiliate of National Wildlife Federation. The scientists that put this report together looked at about more than 100 journals and research papers on migratory birds and climate change and the effects that global warming are having on migratory birds. So it's available online for people to download at nwf.org/birds and climate. And our purpose in having this event is, I think, to draw attention to the implications for Virginia specifically and pull out some of the species that reside in or pass through, more accurately, Virginia, that are being affected by climate change. So, for example, the red knot travels 9,300 miles from the Arctic all the way to the tip of South America, and it passes through Virginia along the way, but it also passes through, obviously, lots of different climates and microclimates along the way. When you make a journey of that length, your exposure to changes in climate and habitat along the way is magnified. People might have a hunch that, well, birds can fly, so if there's a change in one place, they'll just fly to another place that they like better. But with migratory birds, they have these evolved lifestyles, evolved life cycles that have been in place for thousands of years. You know, they're going to make these migrations, and along the way encounter lots of different climates, lots of different potential effects on the climate by human activity. And that does include the loss of habitat because of activities on the ground, and also now effects in the habitat because of human influence on the atmosphere. Out of 305 species of birds that have been tracked in North America, more than half, 177, have seen their centers of abundance shift northward by 35 miles. So on average, already we see birds are migrating further north to find the temperature range that they're accustomed to. So the ruby-throated hummingbird is arriving on average 18 days sooner from South America and Central America than it did in the early 20th century. And you're arriving 18 days sooner, and you're finding that it's also warmer when you arrive and there's nectar, and that seems maybe less consequential. But if it got warm down in Central America and it's still cold in North America, and you arrive and there's no flowers and no nectar in your traditional habitat, then that is a problem. And because we don't expect global warming to have a singular effect on the climate uniformly across the globe, but actually to have a complicated effect, make it hotter in one place, colder in another, there's potentially a lot of disruption for wildlife. And I guess the final point that I think is made in the report that I would emphasize, I think is really relevant in Virginia, is that these climatic effects are happening on top of existing effects from human activity. So take, for example, the king rail. It's a migratory bird that lives in freshwater marshes, and it's already lost about 50% of its habitat in the 18 states, including Virginia, where it's found. We know we're losing coastal wetlands because we're putting in docks and marinas, and we have erosion, wetlands loss for a variety of reasons, mostly because of human activity. And now on top of that, we have sea level rise. So the coastal marshes that remain are being threatened with salination, freshwater marshes, with salination because of the rising sea levels. And I think that's an example that people can see happening, that they can relate to. And if there's good news, I think it's that there are some things we can do. To continue with that example, you're probably familiar with the idea of living shorelines. The idea that rather than putting up hardened, riprap or bulwarks against the rising sea, something like a seagrass planting, small wetlands restoration, and beach restoration can have just as much value for a property owner in terms of flood protection and preventing erosion, but it can also have all these co-benefits of habitat. Obviously bird habitat in the case of the king rail, possibly also aquatic habitat if you're doing a seagrass planting. So Virginia has a good program for living shorelines, and it's one of the things that we would recommend be emphasized and scaled up as we look at how to adapt to climate change in a way that both protects human communities and natural communities. Because we've essentially, I think, locked in enough climatic change that we've got to adapt. We've pumped enough carbon pollution into the atmosphere. We've warmed the oceans, they're rising. And while we should be trying to stop it or slow the rate of it, we also have to deal with it now that it's here. Virginia Conservation Network's perspective and WWF's, it's crucial that we take this problem seriously, both for people and wildlife. We have to adapt. We have to reckon with the fact that these effects are here, but we don't have to just roll over and say, well, we're going to continue burning fossil fuels to create this carbon pollution indefinitely. We actually have tools like the Clean Air Act that allow us to regulate carbon pollution and begin to drive more efficiency into our economy so that we're generating less pollution per capita per capita.
We see that certain things in nature, that if it's a balanced system, the temperature cycle and the light cycle, which are more significant as you get further from the equator, they have been in balance. And animals respond to the temperature cycle. If it's warm, bears don't hibernate. But plants won't grow in the wintertime just because it's warm, because they need a certain amount of sunlight. And that is driven by the calendar. And so having those hummingbirds get here, just because the temperature is fine, if the plants have not started to produce flowers, you get a bunch of dead hummingbirds. And you've got birds that are starting nesting and breeding behaviors before there's adequate food. And it's not a matter that the climate is intolerable or so severe that anybody really notices a problem. It's that the temperature cycle, the light cycle have gotten disconnected as a result of the artificial change. So animals that over hundreds of thousands of years have developed a relationship with their habitat, that relationship is disrupted in a way that they can't anticipate, and neither can they adjust to be able to compensate for. There have been changes that are, some people say, oh, well, over 100 years it's a natural cycle. Changes like this aren't natural cycles. 3 weeks one way or the other to us, who theoretically live 80 years, is not that big a deal. You've got an animal's life expectancy is 24 months. That's a fairly significant difference, and especially when all of their reproductive behaviors are so precisely timed. Climate change exacerbates other problems, as they say. You've got habitat loss, habitat stressors that come in there, and you've got climate change on top of that, which gets the birds here a little out of sync with when their habitat is ready to receive them. One of the other things that has happened, and we've been seeing this, you know about our first eagle we got from the Norfolk Botanical Garden that had the pox virus, Buddy the rockstar crooked-bill eagle. 40 years ago, that bird never would have gotten pox virus at that time because we'd have had a cold freeze that killed the mosquitoes. But when he was hatched, there shouldn't be any mosquitoes, but there are today. And so you've got birds that, where their hatching cycle is timed and it has evolved to be just the right time for those species. And these are birds that nest right on the water. If it has gotten really cold during winter and frozen, then the parasite load is going to diminish greatly.
Looking over the history of the conservation movement, it seems to me that birds and the appreciation and connection people have with birds has been a driver at many different times. So if you think back to the very dawn of the conservation movement, Teddy Roosevelt, before Teddy Roosevelt, we were shooting birds and netting birds by the thousands so that Victorian women could put them on their hats. And they were going extinct in large numbers or becoming very close to extinction. And so Americans reckoned with that through education and the passage of laws and international treaties that are still in effect. We walked a lot of bird species back from the brink when we saw the effect that our behavior was having on them. Then you fast forward 50 years to the era of Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. And there's another kind of great awakening in the American conservation movement around the effect that toxins were having on bird birds specifically, and this kind of borrowing idea of a springtime with no bird song really seemed to resonate with another generation of people. And so we began regulating DDT and regulating other toxins. And now that's why we have birds like the bald eagle on the rebound and thriving in Virginia. So, some of those same tools, education, regulation, laws, and possible treaties with other countries are available to us to deal with this new threat of carbon pollution. And it won't be easy, but we've done it at least twice before, as I see it, and I think we can do it again. So I think that for some Virginians and many Americans, birds are just sort of a species that is near and dear to their heart because it's maybe the piece of wildlife they encounter most on a day-to-day basis.